I got the new alternator 50 amp circuit breaker put in there, and that should make a big difference because that other one, the screws were stripped out on it and it kept backing out, causing problems with the alternator to kick out. So now I can go ahead and put the kick panel back in and the boot cowl, upper boot cowl half back on, and put the windshield back in. Put that plane back together. We got the throttle cable put in, and I changed that cable for the cabin air, and I finally got the circuit breaker for that alternator, the 50 amp circuit breaker, put it in yesterday. So that finishes up everything that I needed to do in there behind that instrument panel. So I went ahead and put the boot cowl back on. I've got it on there now, and now we can get the windshield put on. Well, that windshield went in there like it was made to fit. It took just a little bit of manipulating to get the screw holes to line up there on the trim, where the trim pieces go on the sides, but it's set up now. I can screw it all down. I didn't take the fairing off that on the bottom there where it goes across the boot cowl. I took all those screws out of there, but I didn't take that off there, so I just slid that windshield up out of that retainer. I took the screws out of it, so I've got 100 and some screws to put back in there. I've got 7 or 8 of them on this side, on the retainer that goes on this side, all those ones across the bottom through that retainer ring, and then of course the other side, and there's a trim piece that goes across the top and screws through it. So there's a lot of screwing around to do yet, but the windshield is in there, and that's good. A lot nicer to see the airplane going together than it is taking it apart. The windshield's all in and buttoned all down, so that's one thing off my mind. I finally got the pieces, couplings for the 1/8 inch tubing for the primer line, so I think I'll start making that up. The windshield's all in and buttoned all down, so that's one thing off my mind. That actually went pretty good. So now I can concentrate on putting the stuff on that engine. I finally got the pieces, couplings for the 1/8 inch tubing for the primer line, so I think I'll start making that up. Cleaned up the primer injectors. This is a primer injector, and there's nothing special about it. There's nothing highly machined about it. It's just a brass coupling here. It's got an 1/8 inch pipe thread on one end and a compression fitting on the other. And then actually this one's been a little bit more because it's filled in here and drilled with a tube put in there. Some of them the tube is just put in there and just soldered in. It's got a tube with the end closed off here and just a little nozzle on the end of it, a couple nozzles on the end of it to spray the fuel out through, so there's nothing too complicated about that. Well, anyway, I'll get busy and start fooling around with this and start getting that engine ready to hang on there. I'm running my first primer line. So we got a bracket right here with a T in it, and this will be where the one from the firewall comes in and matches here, and then I've got the stainless steel line coming out. These take a flare fitting on this end, and I did a test fit on the flare on there, and it worked out okay on that stainless. It's annealed enough or soft enough that it'll take a flare without cracking, and it worked fine. I run it through there, routed it around there, and then I've got a new T fitting in there, and that uses a compression fitting on that, and that's a stainless steel fitting there. So I've got that run into there. That'll be the line coming in out of the engine, and then we'll have one come off of here and go up this tube and go up in here, and this plug right here is where the port will be. So we'll run that primer line up to this cylinder, and then we'll take it off of the T there, run over up this one, and in this port right here. Had to make a bracket for that T. I took an Adel clamp, took the cushion off of it, and I tried to punch a hole in it for that T to fit through, but my punch wouldn't punch a hole through it, so I had to take it over to the drill press and get my annular drill bit set out and cut a hole in it. That worked out okay. So that makes a nice neat fitting on there. I worked on this engine on figuring out the primer lines last night until about 7 o'clock, 7:30, something like that. Well, I decided to, since I had it down here where it was nice and solid, I'd go ahead and put these fittings in here where they go. These are for the oil cooler. So I just brought the oil cooler with the baffle and everything up over and set it up on here so I could kind of see how to align that plug. That uses a 45 on that top one and a 90 down in here underneath here. Those both had just plugs in them, and I used a hex wrench with on a socket to get those out. Okay, so let's see how the best way to line that one up too. So that one actually should come down this way just a little bit. There. That lines those both up pretty good. Yeah, okay. They're tight in there tight enough and they're lined up pretty good, but I can't get it apart. We got one more to take out of there, and that's right here. This is where the oil pressure gauge goes, hose goes. This is the adapter that goes in there for the oil pressure. Just a hose fitting on this end and a pipe thread on this end. That has been filled with solder or brazing or something and drilled out for a restrictor hose on there. That's a high pressure fitting, and you don't want to lose all your oil out of that in case your oil line breaks or something like that. You don't want to lose it all at once because it just spray out all over. You can still lose oil pressure. Had a guy one time wound up make an emergency landing in his airplane because he lost oil pressure, and he had a copper line coming out of the oil pressure line out of the engine into the oil pressure gauge in the airplane. 40-year-old airplane at the time. Copper line work hardened and cracked and broke, and it pumped oil out of it. Of course, he lost oil pressure, so he made an emergency landing, but he still had lots of oil in. But it sure made a mess out of everything, spraying oil all over his airplane. It got all over the windshield. He couldn't see out the front. Anyway, it was kind of a mini disaster on there. So now I've got the same size wrench is going to take out these plugs for the primer lines, so I might as well take those out while I'm at it. For the primer injectors. And those are down here on these cylinders, right there. Well, I took these primer injectors over and wire brushed them, got them all cleaned up and everything. And let's just stick them in there just like that. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do the other 3 of those. I'm going to go find some caps for oil cooler outlets. And then I've got one more plug in here, and this is where the dipstick goes, is in here. I'm not going to put it in until I get done fooling around here. I'll put it in last because it sticks up here quite a ways and could be prone to movement on it and maybe getting cracked or something. So I'll wait to put it in there until a little bit later. Well, I think I've got the primer line figured out for this left side of the engine. I've got it attached here. Hopefully that's a good spot. I've got a T in there, and that T uses flare fittings on that one because I got copper pipe and a flare fitting already coming out of the firewall for the primer line. And then that comes out around here. I've got this other T, the new T, right there. And that one is for the stainless steel. It's a stainless steel T, and it uses compression nuts on that. So I've got that in there. I've got a line coming out of it, coming up to this number 4 cylinder, and I've got it clamped down here to the intake tube. That's the same way they had it before, and it's the same clamp that was off the other engine. I've got a piece of rubber hose on there to insulate between that clamp and the stainless steel tubing for an anti-chafe, not electrical insulation, and that comes up there, and got some bends in that should be for shock reduction, keep it from cracking. And then I've got a tube coming out of here, out of the front of this one, lines up along that intake tube. Again, got a piece of rubber hose, fuel line hose on that for anti-chafe, and the clamp down to that. It's standing off away from that so that it doesn't touch it, and a nice big curly Q there coming up and into that number 2 cylinder. And that one is the trickiest one because this baffling is right here. I put the baffling up to make sure, and this nose baffling, I put that up there to make sure that I had clearance. You can see they got a cutout here for it, but that one's always a pain because that one, that is the injector right there, and it's right almost against that baffling. So that should be good. There's enough curves in that to absorb the vibration to keep it from cracking out. Anyway, that's the left side done. Now the right side, we'll have to do it. That's a little longer. That goes around the whole back side of the engine and then around to the other side. But it's more straightforward going into the cylinders because you don't have to worry about the baffling like you do on this left side here on this number 2 cylinder. Primer lines are done. So there's a primer for the right hand side coming out of the T. I'm going to have to straighten that out just a little bit as it goes down around that boss there, that tab. Put one clamp in right here, kind of midway, to give it a little bit of support. You got lots of curves in it to absorb vibration and kind of fit around the contours here. It goes into another T. This one's mounted just like the other one was on the other side that I made up for it. It's an Adel clamp with a hole punched in it. And then we got a line coming out of that, coming up this tube, intake tube, and around into the cylinder. And then the front one, the number 1, that comes out of the T, comes up. It's supported everywhere above, so it's not abrading or chafing on anything. You got tube in here to keep it from chafing onto that intake tube. A piece of rubber hose. This is fuel line. It comes up, curls around, nice curl in it to absorb any vibration, and on into the number 1 cylinder. So that should do it for the primer lines. All shiny stainless steel. So that's good. It started raining out now. We've had about 2 weeks of really nice weather, for the nicest weather we've had for a year. It finally did warm up to 50 degrees yesterday. It got up into 60, better than 60 degrees here in the hangar, but today it didn't warm up that much. It's a little bit on the chilly side today compared to yesterday. We got some stuff done outside, and then I finished up this primer line, so that's a happy day. Now it's time to go inside. Time to quit for the day.